Namaste. Sthapakaya cha dharmasya glanirбhavati bharata abhyuthyanam dharmasya tathātmano. Today is a very, very auspicious day. We have today as the third day of Navaratri. And today is actually the day of goddess Chandraganta. And this signifies something very, very interesting and very, very profound, something that's very profound. So just accidentally, it happened that this goddess is really representing the higher emotional nature in us, that is the moon. And also there is the indication of the clarion call for something new. That's what bell represents. It represents something that's coming about new and removing obstacles through this sound. So I'm going to talk today about an outline of a proposed PG program. And first, I want to establish how this came about. Then I think you will see that where I'm coming from. I think that's very important. The context is very important. What really happened is, before I go further, Bhagyaji, you're able to hear me well?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So actually, I've been kind of an experimentalist with my profession. So I've been in academia, I was in consulting, I did some very ground level company management in small companies. I was on my own for about 4 years. I wanted to quit everything and I started writing a book. But then, I came back to academia, and my life journey was clarified by Vipassana, which got me to think that I should be a person who is in the academic realm. During that time, I also read a lot of Sri Aurobindo, and his view of what is called Chatur Varna, that really impressed me. And it's about true balance in every profession, actually, between 4 different kinds of work. Now, I will not get into that here, that's for another day. But then in my experience, when I was in the corporate world, I found that harmony plays a very important role, especially in the Indian context. I was abroad for about totally for about almost 10 years. And I found that the ecology of harmony is very important for the Indian mind. And I found myself operating at different levels when there is a tacit okay from colleagues, unlike in the West. In the West, it's about individual excellence. So in my corporate world, well, actually, in the world of small business, I found that leading from behind sometimes is very useful. Everybody talks about leading from the front. I've been a student of strategy, and I found that when you talk about leadership theories, the West talks about leading from the front. And I think it's typically because of the fact that leadership theories emerge from army. And the front end fighters are infantry, and you better be brave enough to face the enemy as a leader, as a captain or a major, whatever, whether you're leading a platoon or a company or a division or whatever, you better be really, taking the fire. But very often that is not exactly the way it should be. Like, for instance, I find in knowledge companies, it's very important to give the idea that, you are leading rather than your boss, so to say. And I was fortunate to start my professional life with the Tata Group. And in Tata Economic Controls, we had a chief executive, Mr. Vasant Bhave, who was really never seen, but his presence was everything. I mean, we were so confident, and he will never ever let you down. But then when things are going well, we used to think, all of us, we had a lot of bunch of young, MBA engineers, wonderfully accomplished colleagues, seniors also. And so so this kind of a thing was very much there. That is, leading from behind sometimes is useful. Similarly, when I was working with a very small company, I was actually, whether I liked it or not, I had to take on the role of a chief executive. This was my friend who was a chief executive. I was an advisor. He had to be away for some health reasons for a few months, almost like 6 months, severely. He was not well. Then I realized I had to deal with loaders and people like that. By taking a very, very humble approach, I could have them literally be my partners. I could discuss things with them. I could increase, I could do certain things which the union was not willing to do. It was not unionized in a formal manner, but they were very, very hostile to me initially, but I could bring them around. And, I even sat behind two-wheelers carrying 12 liters of water on the two hands and so on. I mean, I was just kind of freaking out with my life at that time. But I did solve the problem. At the end of the day, the company was not running profitably. I could create a little bit of profit by doing simple things like, going back to the customer and making sure that the payments are made in time and so on. I have to be aware of the time, actually. So I realized that leading from the front in times of danger is very important, but not be swashbuckling like a cowboy, so to say. And I was in the US for 5.5 years, and I've seen that kind of thing being very graceful. That sits well with the people there, but that kind of style doesn't quite fit with our culture. That's what I found out. Similarly, I was involved in a social situation where differences between two groups, the builder group and the non-builder group. But just by being in the center, we could solve some problems. And this is a very long story. I'm not going to repeat over here. We formed an association and solved the problems before I quit that place. By the end of it all, after 2 years, I found everybody was completely, trusting and trustworthy. It was kind of a real eye-opener for me. And coming from an MBA background, this practical experience of 2 years was very, very, very interesting for me. And I had to deal with police, I had to deal with Waterworks Authority, etc., without paying any kind of, undue payments, making undue payments, problems were solved. And there was tremendous amount of cooperation. This was in Cochin, which again is, a place known for very strong views of nuclear.
Sir, are you sharing some slides?
Yes, I will come to that very soon, sir.
Okay.
I'll be sharing. I just wanted to give this background to just say why I started on this journey.
No, actually, many people, there's only a black screen.
Oh, is that so? Yeah, there are these slides. I will come to them in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say that it's experience that makes me talk about these things and not conceptual work. I mean, it's not PhD research or the research article that one writes that makes me say these things. It's actually ground level experience. Two more examples from the teaching field. One, SP Jain, when I came back to India after a PhD. After this, I'll go to the slides. Okay, I'm just trying to establish the need for experiential clarity, which makes me say these things, so that this is at a very formative level, needs to be conceptualized so much more. So what was called development of corporate citizenship, I was in charge of what was originally called the social projects. First year students did not take it seriously at all, but in the second year they took it extremely seriously, and I also took on placement, and actually we made that a USP. Students were getting placed because of the kind of serious work which involved emotion as well as cognition as well as kinesthetics. That I was convinced that there is a different way to do this and not make it overly cognitive, which is what the hallmark of MBA programs elsewhere is, which is the dominant model adopted by us largely. Another example that I had was a social project that was done when I was in University of Strathclyde. A student did something on community enterprise in India. And there is also a very strong theoretical basis for saying this. But this student, just to hurry things up, he used 4 different kinds of sociality rather than the 2 that management acknowledges. William Oliverson talks about horizontal relationship and vertical relationship. And Williamson is a Nobel Prize winner. He talks about markets and hierarchies. Market as in horizontal relationship and vertical is hierarchies. These are the only 2 things actually management acknowledges. But there are other forms of sociality that gets people to be kind to each other, that gets people to be cooperating with each other and so on. So all this made me feel that there is a different way to approach a PG program. So let me first start by critiquing the existing model with due respect to everybody. What I have put here are the different topics in management, and you will find the typical management program will have a few subjects, courses. If I may talk about an entire program, the management, let's say an MBA program, within that there are courses, a 3-credit course, a 2-credit course, and so on. You will find that these are the ones that are there. And these emerge out of historical necessity. For instance, marketing is a takeoff from sales. Sales became, not adequate enough, so we introduced marketing. Similarly, finance, the basis, the genesis of finance is accounting. There's something else that needs to be done. Similarly, operations management coming from engineering, especially production and engineering. So you had production management, then you have operations management. Today that has become, kind of metamorphosed into supply chain management. So what we are seeing is that these are all contingent introduction of courses. And I found myself, I was heading a business school, and I was a part of the curriculum management in different places, and starting from SPJ and so on. Really, one wonders what is holding them together. So some business schools have tried to have a overall perspective. Like, for instance, Stanford talks about IT, Harvard talks about strategy, and so on. So, but that is that's not quite common actually, but everybody is trying to teach everything, so to say, by and large. So this needs to be actually understood as the current overarching models are rather fragmentary and fragmenting. Actually, there's no model for the most. So if AI is going to be an issue, you introduce a course in AI. So there is a course proliferation, so to say, or you can say courses proliferation, which is actually disturbing for a mind that wants to have some kind of closure and conceptual clarity. So what I'm going to suggest is, what I've suggested is, we should have a model that would allow for a comprehensive development of management as a discipline, strategic and based on first principles. I'll come to what first principles mean very soon. Because, in generally the fraternity, one's own fraternity has been doing it, and hence I'm introducing it. All right, let's go to the third one. Yes. I'm sorry to give you this additional work. You have worked so hard as it is.
No, that's okay, sir.
Yeah.
In the third one, I'm saying the current overarching model is rather fragmentary and fragmenting. Actually, one of the very interesting things about Indian thinking is, we are seeking consistency. Consistency at one's own level, and it's not conceptual. It's about one's own dharma, and it can be provided. An overarching model can be provided, which is what the slide number 5 is about. If you see the 5th one, all the courses, all the things that we would like our students to learn can be encapsulated in this particular model shown on slide number 5. So you can see, I have just given the same slide over here in the next one, and I'll explain the slide number 6 over here. You're able to see slide number 6, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So you will find that there are 5 components here, and these 5 components can be described as one, which is nothing but the context. So context is very, very important in the Indian system. It's not about following theory. It's not about not even following a principle. It's being contextually relevant based on one's own ability to carry it off, so to say. So you have Samadhana Veda Danda. Danda is also accorded a certain importance, provided the person can only use that. Because of the past, things could have been so bad that you have to use, very strong medicine. That's the whole idea. But you're not triumphalistic about, using Danda and say this is the model. Nobody says that. Ideally, it can be Sama, Dana, Veda, Danda. Now, I'm not going to get into the depth of these discussions, but I've really discussed this a lot with my students and colleagues, and come to some very, very interesting work. And actually, that's research. Similarly, when we talk about communication, you have Samvada, Vada, Jalpa, Nitanda, for instance. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is context of the person is also very important. So you have personal preparation and growth, rationale for the firm, stakeholders, entrepreneur as a stakeholder. I think it's very important. Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In between there was some other noise. Yeah. So we have the context has to be very, very clearly understood. That includes the company, that includes the stakeholders of the company, that includes the person, the top management, the leadership, etc., etc. That is shown under, the one that is circled, the number that's circled on the extreme top left corner. Similarly, you have 2. So context is defined, so to say. Now this will be taught. This whole thing will be taught during the program, and we'll come to finance, marketing, and all that towards the end. Yeah, I'll and enough time will be there to teach whatever is taught today, because the first 2 trimesters out of, let's say, 6 trimesters, 2 trimesters will be 1, 2, 3, and 4. That will give them a very, very good understanding of how to apply, fundamental first principles on anything for that matter, and then we introduce these functional areas. So now coming back to these different boxes, number 2 is about vision, values, mission, goals, etc. That's about purpose. So context, purpose, and 3 is really about what Westerners call decision making. But I would, in the Indian context, I would say it is about pre-action preparation before action. Yeah. So it's like decision making, but the only difference is in the West they talk about decision making as a formulation and implementation issue, whereby formulators are seers and the implementation people are doers. And traditionally, it's the ruling class versus the ruled class, so to say. We don't want to make that distinction because a lot of things bubble up while acting. So that's why in our system, skills are extremely important, and knowledge and skills are not so different as it is made out to be. Wisdom, knowledge, and skills are all together. Like how you have manasa, vaja, karmana. We don't make such strong distinctions, but at the end of the day, we are actually a very practical people. Though in the last 300 years, we have been told that we are too philosophical. Actually, this philosophy is to achieve consistency in action. That's what that's what we need to convey in the classroom also. For that, we need to develop some scholarship also. So the second last box, it is implementation, strategy implementation. That's really about action. So I've kind of used the current management jargon to convey these 4 boxes, which is really about context, context, purpose, pre-action, and action. And then we say, okay, this is how this applies to finance or product design or quality or manpower planning or marketing or operations management and so on. Yeah, that will be done probably in about 4 semesters because we have a lot of content to be conveyed. But then we convey that, yeah, there is a profession for accounting. There is more or less, actually, there's no profession for sales, like but then you have a profession for engineering and so on, a professional, medical, very strong profession. But we are saying that you can apply these fundamental principles into each of these, and that comes up in the 5th one. Over there, the students get, schooled in, accounting principles, financial principles, and so on and so forth. So now, let's go to the next one. What we are doing is essentially what I've just said: macro context, firm context, internal preparation and communication. That's pre-action, action, and functional expertise. If we can present this in this fashion, we will have students coming out very strong in terms of understanding the practical need for looking at fundamentals, which is what Indian thinking is. And while conveying it, we can tell them these are the Indic principles. And by no means are we saying that Indic principles are the only principles. If you find that this will promote your Swadharma, please go ahead. That is number 7, slide number 7. Is this okay? I mean, is the slide and my talk going okay? Bhagyesh? Shall I move to the next slide?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now, when you look at the program one, the macro context, earlier in that strategic model, as I called it, that with a lot of arrows and boxes. Under macro context, you have personal preparation and growth, all those things that are listed in the first column. There are several hundreds of Indic models would fit in there. Like it's about, first it's about identity. It's about Sakshi Bhava. When you talk about personal preparation growth, we can talk about Panchakosha. Where do I stand? And I can assure you, any kind of practical situation presented to you can be taken through this kind of model. And sometimes you can use Western models. They also have some models that may be used. So like this, one can actually, outline Indic ideas. Like for instance, firm 2 has characteristics. Panchakoshas can be, or Trigunas can be applied to them, or cross classification of the 2 can be applied to them. Right? Similarly, stakeholders. Actually, one of the problems with Western governance system is you need a stakeholder as individuals to actually promote that particular one particular idea. For instance, there were no stakeholders, physical human beings, breathing, talking human beings supporting the environment. If at all they were there, they were actually weak. Yeah. So while in this model, we are saying stakeholders are not necessarily, they need not be represented by bargaining individuals. It's not a political process. Okay. So I've said entrepreneurs as a stakeholder. So the company should really have an internal arrangement to make sure that entrepreneurship is supported, questioning is supported, and the governance mechanisms are properly followed. There is proper communication. There is proper talking back, and so on and so forth, which is beginning to happen now. In the way organizations are actually structured. All right. So that's what this macro context is. So we will be introducing ideas of business at this level itself, but explaining this whole thing without them having any functional expertise yet, because many of these people, they may not be finance majors, for instance, but that will come to later. So they will look forward to how actually things happen on the ground in the last 5th module, which will be about 60% of the entire program. All right. Similarly, firm context, purpose. Now, these things will be very, very explained in very detail, and we'll say it's the purpose that needs to be understood. One very clear example, and there are many academicians here, competitive strategy. Now, competitive strategy, Porter's model should be applied only if you are following red ocean strategy, right? I mean, this is obvious now, but it was not so obvious earlier. If you don't want to have, let's say, a competitive, too overly competitive perspective, that's also okay. So depending upon what your purpose is, you can actually have the rest of the things follow it. Yeah. So this is about the firm context. In fact, I have outlined all these things, and for later discussion, hopefully we'll be able to tease out each of these things in more detail. Internal preparation communication, business research, business analytics, decision-making models, all these have some aspect of Indic thinking. For instance, instead of seeking a bell-shaped curve, I'm talking about business research, instead of seeking a bell-shaped curve, since Indian thinking is inside out, we are actually looking for outliers, outstanding outliers, because human potential is given a lot of importance. Outliers are not rejected. Okay, you're not interested in just finding out what is the average, because you want to actually highlight what the outliers are. Similarly, instead of optimization, we may be looking for balance. Okay, we are not trying to maximize pleasure. We are not trying to maximize happiness. We are trying to make sure that we are trying to have a balance between efficiency and harmony. So a lot of business research questions in the quantum world, they talk about it. Some of them do have some quantitative methods are possible, but we will of course expose them to statistics and optimization and maximization and so on, but not at the cost of thinking that this is the only thing. So that is reductionism in Western philosophy of science language. Similar decision-making models. All right, as I said, we will have, even if there are no custodians for certain kinds of good things, we need to create it. That should be created internally in a society, for instance. So of course regulations are meant to be doing that, and they do to a certain extent, but then it has to be carefully understood at a different level. So that's what this is about. And similarly, we have action. Here I just want to say one thing. Indian thinking is deeply about action, whether it's karma theory, or whether it's nishkama karma, or whether it's swadharma, but it is not about prescribing what the other person should do. You do it according to your capacity, both physical capacity as well as mental capacity as well as spiritual capacity. Nobody is there to blame. When that happens, your action is authentic. That is manasa vaja karmana. So there is consistency across. Such discussion in the classroom will definitely be acceptable to youngsters. I'll talk about the challenges in a little while now. In the next 5 minutes, I want to finish this. This is the fifth model. That is number 12, ma'am. That is, that's all about functional areas, which are given too much of importance that the conflicts are not handled at the end of the day. That's why we have such a large variety of different understanding people go. There are, that is okay. I mean, different points of view are okay. But I think people are being trained to become, if I may say, financial, advocates of finance or advocates of marketing and so on. Now, of course, the initial job may not be strategic in nature, but if you have this kind of understanding, their ability to contribute will be so much more. Of course, they might question a lot of things, but that is what is required. And we know that that's what's today required, especially, what's happening with these ideologies, that things are not questioned, that we know we are paying a cost, humanity is paying a cost for not accepting questions, so to say. Yeah. What will be the likely outcome of infusing Indic ideas? More emphasis on action and experimentation, less doership versus seership dichotomy. We can actually reduce, the perils of hierarchy and so on. More responsible autonomy, swadharma. Less ideological position sense, more flexibility. change in leadership notions. I talked about leading from the front, leading from the back, and how context decides which is appropriate. Trust in natural processes, self-order, very, very important. And self-order is what nature does. There is no one boss saying do everything. And very often, toxicity in organization is created because we are not leaving things to self-order. It's all about, very tight coupling. Those who are familiar with organizational language would know what I'm talking about. Very tight coupled. And by and large, let me say this: in toxic organizations, the boss tries to get the credit. He or she works for 8 hours, but the rest of the people are all working for 12 hours. He or she takes credit for it. This is the reality of modern corporations. Earlier, it was okay when Fayol talks about, principles of management. He talks about unity of command. That's a very lovely concept, but unity of command doesn't work with a knowledge company, for instance, today. So we have to have, a much more mutually appreciative, cooperative system, while at the same time not leaving things to be chalta hai, or just mediocre, so to say. I will just talk about one last thing so that we have time for. So that'll be the outcome. Next slide, 14. Pedagogy will be very different. Ultimately, yeah. 14. Pedagogy. What will happen is storytelling becomes very important, because storytelling is really, it's about combining emotions with cognition. And if there is theater, if there is a street play, if there is any kind of play for that matter, storytelling has that kinesthetic engagement also. So it's about engaging all aspects of the mind. And when you have mythological stories, I mean, we can get into the difference between itihas and history and so on. I've really become fond of that. And my journey has been from like engineering to systems thinking, management to systems thinking to aesthetics, and I mean all kinds of different things. But finally, many of these things will have final solutions in Indian thinking. To say that, well, how does it matter whether Ravana had 10 heads or 1 head? If you can imagine Ravana of a certain qualities, okay. I mean, in this case, let's say negative qualities. Sometimes people show it as positive qualities. Whatever it is, but 10 heads represent 10 different things. It doesn't matter whether such a person existed or not, but human imagination is most important. And many people, including management academics, as strategy people, for instance, are arguing for this kind of a point. Instead of saying that a case study, I've heard Harvard business professors saying that we give cases that actually happen with actual people in actual situation. And I would say that's not required, because imagination can take us to much further frontiers. That's why we have ether as a fifth Panchabhuta. I mean, that's for another day's discussion. It'll be more discursive, because we say these final principles apply to different things. So we'll talk about human organization, then we can talk about birds and the bees and the animals and trees and earth and cosmos, and then come back to this. So we discursive. It makes it more interesting and universal. Adult learning particularly. School, you can't do that, because they have to understand 2 + 2 = 4 and so on. Those are convergent subjects. Experiences versus concepts, very, very important. Ultimately, all language is about, bringing the experience to the forefront. Emotions, the head and the heart can go together only when we have experiences conveyed and experiences, thought through in the human mind. I mean, all these things have been deeply discussed in Buddhism literature, Hindu literature, and so on. Westerners also talks a lot about these things, but those things have been forgotten in the last 400 years. First principles without the burden of ethical moorings. This is very, very, very important. Indian models are not about, the way very often we interpret. For instance, the idea of tamas. Tamas is not a bad thing. Tamas is about, not doing anything. So sometimes when we seek stability, we are pursuing tamas. Now, I'm saying this with a lot of responsibility, because I've done research on this. I've talked to people, very knowledgeable people. And very often we take some of these things in a wrong way. because Sri Krishna told Arjuna to act. And at that time, tapas was wrong. But when the Pandavas were going to the forest, the Ajnadavasa, at that time, they were told to lie low, not to fight, not to get into arguments, not to tell people who they are. They needed to be in a state of tamas in a way. Okay. Actually, so depending on the context, we need to understand. But at the same time, we say that kama, krodha, lobha, mada, moha, malsarya are not desirable things because it binds you to certain things. But the person has to work out these things himself or herself. It's not like just turning a switch on. That's why we find that very often in the Western world, psychologists are the most disturbed people. I mean, I don't want to say bad things about West because I think it's a recent phenomena, because I've been looking at some of the earlier literature and we find, the Panchabhutas in Japanese, the 5 rings of strategy, for instance, talks about the same as, Panchabhutas, but the ether is defined slightly differently. In the African continent, during the Ethiopian, like the Egyptian and Ethiopian cultures, they talk about these kind of elements which are very close to this, but science roughshod over them. They kind of walked over them, but in India somehow it got retained because we wrote down these things. So it's very important to do research also. Agency, ecology, balance, causality and effectuation. I mean, these are deep fundamental things, and I don't want to get into these philosophical levels, but we can discuss in the classroom, and students understand these things very easily. When you talk about agency, ecology, am I responsible? That is agent or structure, determinism versus free will, for instance. So all these things can be discussed, and ultimately it's our effort to make a difference to the world that's important. So agency is very, very important in this thing, much more than what MBA education today tells us. That's why we have recently, we have started having some entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurship is possible in all fields, not just making products. In education also, there is entrepreneurship required, for instance, creative writing. All this can be applied to every field. In spiritual area also, how we take some of these prayers and interpret them. It's about, the agency, making a difference to our own life. And that's how bhashyas, according to Aristotle, I'm not a scholar in that area. So like this, I have listed, and I will stop here because we don't have much time. I'll go to the next one, that is 15. Thank you very much. And I hope, my presentation has not been too disruptive, thanks to our friends from CES. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Can we take a few questions?
Yes, please. Yes, I'm very happy to take the questions.
What are the changes in the management for bringing effective education?
Please repeat it. I couldn't hear that properly.
What are the changes to incorporate in management for bringing effective education?
Yeah, what we need to do is we have to actually we have to look at the stakeholders. First of all, two things. First, look at this is just one model. Okay, so I've been kind of educating this model with a lot of my senior colleagues. We have to discuss this threadbare, and we have to be very critical of this model so that things will come out. And this criticalness, or if I may, this critiques come through research. So we must have a lot more people doing fundamentally this level research in terms of saying, why should we be looking for, first of all, should we be looking for outliers rather than bell-shaped curves? Should we be looking for balance rather than, maximization?
Yes.
What does it mean? So we have to do a lot more research. Now the research, you can't wait for the research to happen to implement this. So what we can do is introduce such a model. Don't call it MBA, call it MM, Master of Management or something, and get a small group of people, not more than 10. Don't look at the cash flow right now. About 10 people, and kind of get them to be like, one semester will probably be for only paper and get them to become partners for developing this, who have some background, in Indic thinking. Some of them may have gone to a Gurukula, but people have an open mind. That is most important. And so for this to be effective, we have to deal with the subject first. Next, the student should be willing to come in and say that, okay, I'm going to use these principles and apply it to the company that I join. But they cannot expect employment straight away from this because we don't have that yet. Third, we must go around and talk to people like Bembu Sridhar, for instance, or we should talk to people like the Maverick or the Semler. He's a Brazilian, but if you're going to have an international market for students, so we have to identify people, probably even Sri Narayan Murthy, some of the people who have been, kind of looking at innovation, talk to them. That is number 3. So the subject itself, the fraternity of faculty, then don't load them with administrative load at that time, because the moment we do administrative work, it goes against the actually, I must say this, I may not be very popular for saying this, but when we have too much of bureaucratic work filling up forms, it goes against the spirit of Swadharma. So I think we should have a group of people who are extremely responsible, who err on the side of being wrong to oneself to be ethical. Then we can just leave out all these things. And I don't want to say ethical in a moral sense, but in a governance sense. I mean, that is another question. But some research students we should have, actually, because it's an inquiry. So the fraternity of people, the students, then employers. We should identify employers like this. Fourth, very, very important, management, if it is private schools, and of course, regulators. Because some of the regulations, I can talk about, educational governance, because I was doing that kind of, research for about 5 years. And some changes have taken place, including because of the kind of work we have done. So we have to get a buy-in from them. And we should have deep respect for each other. That will also be created with this kind of thinking. Because at the end, it's not about fight between finance and market, from department versus department. So it's a very sensitive thing, but if if the people get together with these kind of things taken care of, I think it's not easy. It's a very, very it's not a difficult task, but it will be a different task, hugely different task. And I have within my own pyramid, so to say, I have tried this, and it works very well. Especially in India, self-order works maximum. If there is one country where self-order works, is this country. Am I answering that question?
Yes. Can we go?
Yeah, please.
The difference between traditional MBA and MBA.
Yeah. The difference here will be, with this kind of a program, they will be appropriate for doing any kind of work. I have many examples where the social sector people, or people who wanted to create a platform cooperativism, company under platform cooperativism, found students from very, very noted institutions completely inappropriate. But they found that people who are coming from more modest background could fill in there, because they had their head on their shoulders, so to say. Otherwise, it's just smartness that works. So what I'm trying to say is, this kind of a treatment will be appropriate for any kind of management, whether it's social, that is the NGO sector, even government. Okay, government, we have to be a little bit more careful, because it requires a little bit more, I guess, stick a little bit more, and depending on the sector, so to say. So the difference will be this: these people will be appropriate, and I believe it will be useful even in their private lives. Yesterday we had Dr. Venkat saying how the Tirupati journey actually changed his life itself, his attitude towards everybody. So I think this will change everything, because we are looking for first principles without judgment. First principles are not about right and wrong. It's about laying a possibilities map, separately talking about what is right and wrong, having a great discussion about it, and deciding, for yourself in a Swadharma fashion. So that's, it won't be conflict free, but the conflict will be absorbed in the human psyche, each individual, and will be handled at a cognitive and an emotional level. And that's much better, and that's a higher way to deal with conflict than go into the street and knife each other or shoot each other.
The next question.
Yeah.
Whether modern management is aligned with core values of Indian education system.
Yeah.
With IKS.
It is not. It's because I've come with a, since this question came up, I've come with a theory of these Indic theories, if you would, a meta theory. That is, any theory that we bring, anything that we talk about should fit into 4 categories. There could be more, but currently I have 4 different categories, so to say. One is I applied the Indic principles to managing this thing. Where I could have also used Western. That is the first level Indic application. Second level, we have a responsibility to say that by using the Indic model, I have a superior thing. And so for that, we have to have our own experience or the experience of people who have used Indic theory. But we can't simply, according to me, we can't simply use something and say that this is it. As an individual experience at the first level, it's okay. But at the second level, it has to be stronger way to bring in Indic model. Now, this requires challenging the Western ideals. And Western ideals require challenging Western philosophy. For instance, determinism versus free will. Inside out versus outside. We'll have to challenge the idea of strategy, for instance. Okay, Mintzberg has done it by saying strategy can be any of the four P's. And I'm not just talking, I have read these things, but I found experience has to inform these things and say that, okay, for this time, I'm using a tactic as a strategy. So we must have that conceptual clarity, which is what education, higher research and all are about. So I think, yeah, these are the challenges. So we have not, I don't think we have arrived anywhere because we are still trying to be practical. We have enough case studies to show how technology absorption in India during the 50s was about taking technology from outside. It was not about science. So we created Indian Institutes of Science. If there is any science created, it was us. What I'm saying is this applied thing is because we will apply things too strictly. Even the Westerners would have given up the reasons for whatever. But when it comes to as a borrowed idea, we apply it even more strongly. That's why we have a bureaucracy. I'm sorry to say, bureaucracy is not just government, but everywhere. All right, including our minds are bureaucratized. It's because they told us 100 years ago something, and we still follow. And that's not India. Am I making sense?
Yes.
We need to have a So the starting point, according to me, is and very, very critical questions, which are very uncomfortable. We need to have so much more of research in this area, and that research has to be done by, modest people who will never say this is a final word.
Thank you very much, sir, for such a wonderful session. May I now request that a few words. Sir?
Yeah. Namaste, sir.
Namaste, sir. Namaste. We've been talking about this for a long time. So yeah.
It was a wonderful session. And every one participants.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was very some very different. So thanks again.
Thank you very much. Yeah. I just want to say just 2 minutes, not more than that. I just want to say that to take this further, I think SES could think about a group of people. If this is if these ideas are useful, they could have a group of people identifying, for instance, some PhD topics as a first thing. Just as a fun exercise, if you could have a few ideas, and then if you can have those serious scholars, there are many young people here, I'm sure, who may be looking for ideas to do their research on. I think we will be able to offer some interesting ideas for further research. I think research is very, very important. It has to be understood not in the way it is today, where it's more like, not everybody, with due respect to everybody, but often it is like a mandatory thing for teaching and so on. I think, that doesn't fit in with our idea.
We are planning actually also around this and yeah.
Very good. Very nice. Thank you. And I look forward to a lot of inputs, because my understanding of Sanskrit is limited. But if you go back to, someone told me that there's some 20 million identified documents which have not been even opened and interpreted in this, which is there lying out there in the archives.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's amazing. Yeah, that was said by, Mr. Sudarshan.
Thank you again, sir. Thank you again, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Session.